Boker Tov, good morning. I'm Rabbi Stephen Moskowitz, and this is Monday Musings, a spiritual kickstart to the week. At least that is my hope. I am joined today by Rabbi David Thomas, the Rabbi Emeritus of Congregation Beth in Sudbury, Massachusetts, who's now living in Minneapolis. We have been friends, we just figured this out now, since 2007. Since starting the Rabbinic Leadership Initiative at the Shalom Hartman Institute. We are RLI 3 and very proud of that. We have spent many glorious summers together in Jerusalem, I have to say. We have been there for countless many. So I asked David to join me this morning to talk a little bit about some of his interests and accomplishments. And in particular, David is an avid hiker. He's part of the 4,000 footer club. He hiked the 48 4,000 foot summits of New Hampshire, I believe. Did I get that right, David?
You did get that right.
Okay.
Good morning, Stephen. It's so good to see you. If we can't spend the summers together in Jerusalem, I think that Zoom is the next best thing, as we've all learned in these past few months.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. So I've always admired David in particular for these hiking accomplishments. And I have to say, we hiked a great deal together in Israel. And one of the things I noticed, I wanted to start with this, David. One of the things I noticed was that, I would always be running to the top. And David was always the same pace. Whether we were going up, going down, going straight, he was always the same pace when he was hiking. And I thought David could really offer us some insights about the connection between hiking and spirituality, what you learned, summiting those 48 peaks. So, David, you want to share a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to be here this morning with you. I really appreciate it. It's a great opportunity to reflect a little bit on some of the things that I did over the years. I'm proud of and were meaningful and really important to me. You mentioned the setting the pace and keeping a pace. I'm not sure that I was ever very aware of the pace that I was keeping. But there was one thing that I thought was really kind of powerfully important, and maybe it's a lesson for life as well. And that is, so many of us, myself included, have in mind that the goal is the summit. It's a 4,000 footer club. It's actually not the 4,000 foot and get back to your car club. But the reality is that getting back to the car, but wherever your starting point was, is actually crucial to the exercise, because you haven't completed the hike when you've made the summit. You complete the hike when you safely return to your original place. And that was something I kept in mind all the time. What the goals were there. And I think that having our goals kind of calibrated for both reaching the peak moments in our lives. I mean, certainly the summit was a very strong draw to get there. It never felt great to turn around when not having made it to the summit and turn around to go back. But I think that the profound lesson that I learned more than almost any other in terms of hiking these 48 peaks was the lesson of humility, of understanding what my human limitations are, and especially understanding the power and the power advantage that the natural world has. I mean, there's this strange phenomenon out there called gravity, and you could be at the top of a mountain and gravity could come into play, and you just want to make sure that you're respectful of that, because otherwise you end up coming down the mountain in a way that you hadn't planned for. So I think that was one of the things that was helpful for me.
Can we talk a little bit more about that getting to the top, piece, because I think that is a drive that so many people have. If we kind of, reflect a little bit in more general about life, there's the drive to get to the top and not thinking about the whole journey as a circle, that's so important and such an important reflection that you're sharing. So can you dwell a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, as a matter of nature, the summit of the peak has a tremendous draw, a magnetic draw, and it's a part of the spirituality of the hike, and that is, generally speaking, the summit is where you get the views. That's where when you arrive there, and sometimes there's this dramatic kind of revelation that takes place as you emerge from the treed lower elevations, emerge from the forest to get above the tree line and to be able to take a perspective on the world that you didn't have before. So the summit is a really powerful, getting to the summit is a really powerful experience from that point of view. And I think that the challenge for people that like me who feel so drawn to that we want to do it over and over and over again and on different peaks and to get those different perspectives is again that lesson of humility, to understand that the summit has tremendous draw and tremendous power, and the ultimate goal is to return safely. We can't live there, at least most of us can't live at the summit, and I think it would lose a lot of its charm if we did. So it's a matter of balancing the attractiveness of arriving at a summit and feeling a sense of accomplishment, and then making sure that you get back safely, and that just means staying alert and awake, which is the other, in addition to humility, I think the other spiritual aspect of hiking is to be out into nature is to call on us to wake up and to pay attention to the world around us, and that applies equally to the little things that we rush past on our way up to towards the peak. To stop at a mountain stream, or to stop just to simply listen. You can't hear very much, even if you're hiking by yourself. The sound of your own footsteps can take over, and you don't necessarily tune into the world around you. So I tried to make it a practice to take a little bit of time on the way, to simply stop and even to sit for a few minutes in a random spot, and to just listen to the world around me. And in that is a great awakening and a consciousness of the larger world beyond ourselves.
I often think about, climbing trees or scampering up rocks, and climbing rocks, you always have to think about the way down. I mean, it's much easier going up and scampering up the rocks, and people often get themselves into trouble, because it looks so easy to scamper up, but you can't necessarily find your way down. So you always have to be sure of the path down when you're doing that before you even start. Was there ever a summit that disappointed you?
Oh, there were some that were frankly just an all-out slog. I mean, I know that that's the thing when you've got a list and you're ticking off, you're bagging. It's called peak bagging, right? When you're bagging peaks, and inevitably there's going to be a summit or two along the way that were kind of not particularly extraordinary. And I think that's where the experience of peak bagging was really kind of helpful. Was that sometimes there's some drudgery involved. There's a lot of hard work. The Owl's Peak, peak, I think the name of it was Owl's Nest. It's been so long I can hardly remember. But it's an 18-mile in and out hike, and it's a long day, and a lot of it is through mosquito-ridden, swampy areas. There's part of it there's no official trail to, so a little bit of bushwhacking that I did could save me about 5 miles, but boy, you pay a price in terms of just on these hot, humid, sweltering days that were mosquito infested. Yeah, it feels like when you're done, you feel like you accomplished something, but the doing of it wasn't necessarily as much fun as those hiking alongside a sparkling mountain stream and coming to this, the revelation of this beautiful view at the top of a peak that, where you're standing on a rocky crag and you want to hang out all afternoon, just having lunch and sipping water. So yeah, there were a few that were not so great, but even in those most remote areas, there were surprises. Like the time I came across a huge hedgehog sitting in the middle of the path. Actually, it was a good thing I saw it before my dog did, because that could have been a small disaster. And some of the other hikes where they're more remote and there are not as many people around, seeing moose along the way was a regular occurrence. And
Wow.
So if you're ready for it, then even those hikes that are not as attractive can reveal moments that are really very beautiful.
I have two questions. Did you always hike by yourself or with your dog, or did you ever go with others?
In order to qualify for a membership in the 4,000 Foot Club, you have to keep a journal. So I do have a journal. I have every hike that I did, the date that I did it, the distance I hiked, and the amount of time it took, and the people that went along the way. And the name that shows up most often is Oscar. He's my Labradoodle. He's been my hiking partner, and he's a terrific hiker. He's really great. But I would do it with various family members as well, and especially when we would take vacation time up in New Hampshire, I would. But a lot of the hikes, were not necessarily of interest to them, and nobody else seemed to be interested in this accomplishment of bagging the 48 peaks. So I would often go. My day off as a rabbi was Tuesday. As you mentioned, I served a congregation in Sudbury, Massachusetts. It's about 2.5 hours to the closest 4,000 footer, and about 3.5 to the most distant. But I would get up at 5:30 in the morning on my day off. I would drive the 2.5 or 3 hours to the trailhead for the hike that I would do that day. Hike 7 to 10 miles, bag a peak or 2 or 3, and then hop back in the car and head back. And I did quite a few of them in the winter, which was also made for some really interesting conditions and longer hikes, because a lot of the access roads are closed in the winter, so you have that additional piece of hiking that you have to do. But also, of course, the additional factor of winter weather and snowpack, which significantly affects the quality of the hike.
But changes the view.
It changes the view. You get really great views. You just got to be kind of aware. So I used a number of different planning tools. I always made sure that I checked trail reports first. It's not a lot of fun to go on a significant hike by yourself when you're trying to hike through 18 inches of snow or more. The snowshoeing in that is
exhausting.
Really exhausting. So I usually would try to find trails that had already been packed out by a small group before I would go. And in some ways, the hiking is a little bit easier, because instead of climbing up or scrambling up blocks of rock, which New Hampshire is famous for, these large kind of blocks that you have to strain yourself to get up. The snow over the season would make a nice ramp that would go up the mountain that way. So the winter provided a situation that was easier on the knees.
So was there a spiritual preparation before you went out? How did you kind of get yourself ready? I understand there's the practical kind of packing your bag and so forth, but
yeah, no, I'm not a meditator, so I didn't have a kavanah that I would focus on immediately prior to the hike. I think that for me, the spiritual preparation was my regular Shabbat morning Torah study, and the opportunity to study with a group from members of the congregation. We focused a lot on the Hasidic masters. And that Torah study, along with my experience of hiking, both contributed to informing my own sense of theological growth and change. When I first came to the congregation, when I left rabbinical school, I was solidly in the school that God is a transcendent being who lives outside of nature. The God that is described in the Torah and the Hebrew Bible. The God is transcendent, exists as a being outside of nature, sees what we do and rewards or punishes our behavior, et cetera, et cetera. And I moved away from that notion to the notion that's more mystical and more Hasidic, and that is that God is inherent in all being, that God exists in everywhere in the universe, as the prophet Isaiah said, "Molo chol haaretz kavodo," the whole earth is filled with God's glory. So I believe that God is radically immanent, that God is in nature, that God in fact is the energy that animates all of existence. And so if that is true, and this is what was confirmed by my experiences of hiking, was I really experienced that in a very deep and profound way. The hiking enabled me the opportunity to kind of wake up and to develop a consciousness of God's presence in all things and in all being. And the result of that was profound awe and a sense of oneness with nature, and a deep respect for the natural world in which God inheres. And it provided me with tremendous personal growth. And I think it was also growth that I brought to the congregation. I ran a number of programs called Shabbat in Nature. The acronym SIN was "Come Sin with the Rabbi," do spirituality in nature, or Shabbat in nature. And I would bring groups up to some of my favorite places in New Hampshire, and with a number of different exercises that we would do that would help us kind of slow down and wake up and listen carefully and experience the divine in our natural world.
So it's so interesting to me that a number of my friends who have had on these this show, as I'm lately calling it, just a little bit much, but it have reflected that about how they find God and spirituality, outside of the synagogue. And I don't know if it's been sort of who I've asked. Of course, two of them are my brother and my wife. So there is that sort of, I don't know if it's a random sampling, but I think the impression of the rabbi is that the rabbi finds God and spirituality in the sanctuary where he or she is leading, tefillah and leading services. And yet, well, all of us are reflecting on this tremendous spiritual growth that we have found outside of the sanctuary.
Well, the key, of course, is to bring it back to the sanctuary. So I don't think that it wasn't that I couldn't find my spiritual life outside within the sanctuary. Quite to the contrary. I think that one of the things that was helpful for me was with this kind of newly formed idea about where God is and where God's presence is manifested. We human beings are also a part of nature, right? Even Jews, believe it or not, are a part of nature. So the human relationship is our most complex relationship with nature and with the natural world. And human relationship is the key kind of a spiritual component of our lives. So the key is to bring what we learn from nature back into the synagogue, and to see that when we look at the face of the other, our friends, our neighbors, our members of our families, our members of our congregation, believe it or not, even the ones that we maybe don't care to hang out with very much, both those that we love and those that challenge us in other ways, is to see the divine presence in them is really the ultimate kind of spiritual and religious experience. And it should claim us as a major obligation, is to see the divine image in every human being. And that's a practice that has to begin in the synagogue.
I agree, but part of what I'm trying to suggest is, and I do think we need to bring it back to the synagogue and bring it back to our community. What we find is, part of what I'm struggling with is that we're creating this impression that Jewish spirituality is, only sort of, what we do in the synagogue in terms of stand up, sit down, say this prayer, say that prayer. And part of what I want to convey, and sort of the realization that has come to me in terms of talking to so many of my friends, online here, is that, there's so much spiritual strength that we can gain, in the natural world or in yoga, that we should be bringing back, and that we want our congregants and our friends to see that as part of the Jewish journey and part of the Jewish structure. It's not like, well, that I'm not spiritual, people say, or I'm not religious, and that means I don't go to synagogue too often. But why can't it be that I'm religious because I hike and I pause and I take in nature, and that informs my prayers, and that informs how I see even the person sitting next to me in synagogue. I think that's a beautiful piece that we can all take away from this.
Absolutely. I think the invitation to go find God in your relationship with God in all aspects of our lives and all places in our world is a really powerful one. And the opportunity to bring that back to the synagogue is always, it's always there. One of the things that I'm most proud of is that we created a Shabbat, completely new way of worship on Shabbat evening, called Shabbat Rinah, Shabbat of joyous song. So one of the things I realized is that how do we remove some of the barriers in the synagogue that make it harder for people to experience that sense of spirituality? So we set the prayer book aside, because I think the prayer book is wonderful. I love it. I love our tefillah, but I think it's very challenging. I think the images of God that we find there are often don't resonate with folks. So we set the prayer book aside and brought in beautiful images, many of which I took on my hikes, and projected them in the sanctuary, and reduced the words, got rid of the words, and introduced more song and singing. And I think that people found that was a way. And the other thing in my synagogue that I'm very proud of, and it was not something that was of my doing, was we had a prayer garden in the adjacent to the sanctuary, which we utilized not just for special services, but every service that we ever had was an invitation to go out into the garden, including in the winter, and to spend the tefillah, the central part of our prayer service together, to spend that on one's own out in the garden and experiencing whatever nature had in store for us on that particular Shabbat just outside the building. So there are things that you can that one can do to help have this idea of spirituality that exists everywhere kind of pervade one's life.
Yeah, and I think, returning to the Hasidic masters and to the original Hasidic masters is certainly, one way of going. And, you reminded me of Nachman of Bratslav and how the meaning he found in nature. Look, we know we've got to sort of wrap up, because I promised that this is meant as a brief spiritual kickstart. And I do want to have David back, not just because we're good friends, but I promised we would talk also about that 2016 NAACP journey that you took in terms of commemorating the 50th anniversary of the March from Selma that you participated in. So we do have a lot more to talk about, not just nature, but I want to thank you for reminding us of the spiritual power of nature and how just walking and being attentive to our footsteps. I very much like that image, is something that we can kind of, bring to our prayer and to our faith. So thank you again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Boker Tov.
Boker Tov. Thank you.